This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
We're going to start a really interesting evening of conversations, and I am lucky to be with all of you in the next one. So you're going to all be sick of me by the time we're done with this, but I'm going to interview yet again another headline interview, another fascinating person who has contributed significantly to our understanding of the ecosystem surrounding cancer research and clinical trials and really which has become such a national problem. It's been so impressive to hear everyone today, but we're going to have a very dour person next. So please welcome to the stage Clifton Leaf, an editor of Fortune magazine and author of this book, The Truth in Small Doses, Why We're Losing the War on Cancer and How to Win It. We had a lunch today, really hosted by Lily, and in this, someone at the table was brave enough to say to Clifton that he was one of the most unliked people in the cancer business. And he said it very politely.
He did. Yeah.
Thank goodness I was between the two of you.
Nice.
You seem to be a pretty good guy, pretty nice guy. I've enjoyed our time together. But you've issued a really strong indictment against the cancer research industry.
Yeah.
The doctors, the ecosystem, the funders, the government, the whole thing. And so I'd love to just give us an on-ramp into why you think we're failing so badly.
Well, you start with a story where there are no villains. And I make that clear in the book, and I hope I make that very, very clear in the talks that I've given. It's hard to imagine, a failure this grand, in my view, anyway, where there are no villains, where everybody comes into it with the right aims, with the right expertise, with the right dreams when they go to bed at night. But during the day, when they go to work, virtually all of the incentives for their day-to-day jobs are misaligned with the goals. So if the goal is to collaborate, the day-to-day incentives for most researchers is to not collaborate. And this is done through the grants operations, through the publications rights, the academic promotion system. If the aim is to share data, to create an open data system, the day-to-day incentives are really about hoarding data and keeping things very, very secret and about patenting aggressively. And so if the aim at the clinical research side is to intervene in the cancer research process early, in the cancer development process early, the day-to-day incentives make that almost impossible. And so what we have is really a cultural failure. We're great people who want to do all the right things are stuck in a system that doesn't work.
Do you think that particularly, the amount of money that goes into cancer research is just stunningly large. It's a huge amount of money. I guess people could raise the case that there are still resource issues, but when you compare it across the board to lots of other things, there are lots. Is the need to say there is progress afoot, even though when there's not progress afoot, a function of the money part of this, the psychological part of this?
Well, I think it's more it's first the psychological part and then second the business model. I think you can't keep asking people for money, especially from donors and marchers. And I served for 3 years on the board of the Komen Foundation. I know what it is to wear a pink ribbon in March. And so I think that there is this sense. I'm sorry?
Did you quit Komen or did they quit you?
No, I had a 3-year term and it ended long before any of this other craziness started, I'm happy to say. So I was off the board. But in that time, I understood what it was like to keep an organization the responsibility as a board member to keep an organization like that functioning. And part of that, the organization existed for the organization's sake because that's part of what the larger mission was of bringing the message about, cancer awareness and prevention to as many people as they could. So they had to keep that organization sustained. But you need to kind of communicate gains. But there's a grade inflation. So the natural tendency is that everything that comes out of a discovery, out of a bench discovery, becomes, an advance. And then advances become breakthroughs. And breakthroughs lead to this process where, hey, we're making progress, we just need more money, we're just this close. Please, the only thing keeping us back is money. And what I would say is that, yeah, it would be great to have more money. For a lot of people, it would make a lot of lives easier. But to change the system, money alone won't fix what we need. So we do need maybe more money, but we have to fix some of the sort of cultural barriers, the systemic barriers, in order to put that money to good use.
Now, you had Hodgkin's as a young boy, and you were diagnosed with Hodgkin's. And it is in this realm of Hodgkin's where you've had one of the greatest leaps, if you will, and you might tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah.
But do you find something structurally different in what is the drug is? How do you pronounce it? Gleevec?
Gleevec, yeah.
Yeah, so Gleevec. How has the system that produced that been different than what you've seen in other cancer therapies?
Well, that's a really good question, because I think when you go back and you look at the history of, if you look at what the rhetoric now is that we've entered into a molecular revolution in which the drugs that are being designed to target specific, I can't even say specific. That's how hard it is. Specific,
did well that second time.
And I haven't even got to molecular aberrations yet. So imagine how hard that is. Specific molecular aberrations, in which the understanding of the cancer process is what's driving the drug development. And so this is supposedly our revolutionary, threshold. But if you go back to the early days of cancer drug development, that was also quite rational. In fact, the scientists talked about it in the same way of we're entering a new rational era, in which they were targeting the cell cycle in different ways and in different processes with very targeted drugs. Now, the difference was that those drugs also attacked other cells that were dividing rapidly. And so there were more side effects. And so it was more of a bludgeon effect. But the thinking behind it was quite rational. And virtually everything you can think of, from the very first folate antagonist, methotrexate, which was interfered with B vitamin synthesis, to drugs that interfered with what are called the mitotic spindle, where the chromosomes separate from, were all very rationally developed. And so I think it's more of a continuum rather than a true departure in terms of the science.
The Siddhartha Mukherjee and you were profiled together in a great article that I wish I could distribute to all of you. It was in the July 1st, 2013 of The New Yorker. And yes, we at The Atlantic do read The New Yorker. And it's called World War Cancer. It's a terrific article that basically looks, and we had Siddhartha with us this morning, and he's largely perceived, and you've accused him of being slightly too optimistic about the revolutions going on, the kinds of scientific moment we're at where there possibly could be a lot of other breakthroughs because you're indicting the structure. Do you think the critique of you is the sort of, there is this subpart of how to win it, which we haven't gotten to on your book, but a lot of your book is why we're not winning it.
Yeah.
And a lot of his book is a narrative of these stories, the history of this horrible disease, well, I don't know if it's a disease, but horrible ailment, and that he sees the prospect of things getting better, and you think they're not. So what do you think you need to fix to get in his spot?
Well, first of all, I think that he's brilliant, and the book is brilliant, and he's done a remarkable service, I think, to the broader humanity for bringing this conversation to bear. And I don't think he's too optimistic or too pessimistic. I think his mission was to do a biography of cancer and to really bring it and to put it in its historical perspective and to help elucidate the fact that we have been struggling with this issue for a long time. In my view, I really focused on the culture of cancer research, on a sort of on what's holding back very bright, very committed people from doing what they want to do. So we've talked a little bit about grants over the past, and you can't really do anything without getting funding. And the mother's milk of modern science is the R01 grant. This basic, it's a research project grant. And this is really what drives academic science, this R01. And it's very, very difficult to get. But most academic scientists will spend more than 50% of their time going through the process of gathering preliminary data and filling out the forms and serving on the right committees, and less than half of their time really focusing on the science. The rates, the success rates have been smaller and smaller. Now, part of that is a function of a flat funding for budgets, but part of that is where that money has been going. And so what I hope to see is that young scientists, in particular, young investigators, mid-career investigators as well, can have more freedom to actually do the research that they want to do.
This morning, to say that Siddhartha Mukherjee was relatively apathetic about my mentioning Richard Nixon, which I need to do is in every event, as I mentioned this morning. Yeah. You were one of the few people in the room that said that's right, that Nixon actually did grab a moment, that the war on cancer at the beginning was important. But then you told me later today that the wrong bill passed. That's right. And I think maybe, can you give us a little insight into what you mean by that?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to give credit to Nixon. I think part of this was for the one chance he had to beat Ted Kennedy, to beat any Kennedy. So he seized that national moment to say, we're going to pass this very paradigm-shifting war on cancer. Now, there had been an earlier war on cancer declared in the 1930s when we first built the National Cancer Institute. Which also started in part from a piece in Fortune magazine, which I give credit to my employer. But in the 1970s and the late 60s, there was this movement to sort of attack cancer with this great barrage of resources akin to what we had done with the moonshot, to send a man to the moon and return him safely. And many people in the medical community thought this was naive, that we didn't know enough about the cancer process to do this. We didn't know enough about the science to make this happen. And they were very skeptical of this. And what happened was Kennedy had proposed a bill that, based on a panel of consultants, that said, listen, we've got to remove the cancer enterprise from the NIH, from the broader NIH, and rethink how we do this. And part of those elements will be building in collaboration, building in accountability, using more contracts rather than outright grants, making sure that we had an engineering approach to a broader problem. A competing bill by a guy that was sponsored in the House. These were all Democrats, by the way.
Who was the guy?
Rogers of Florida. And he was one of the few to actually oppose the Kennedy-Johnson ticket, interestingly. A fellow Democrat, but a very conservative Southern Democrat. And he basically scuttled the bill that was passed 79-1 in the Senate. And substituted a separate bill with the same number, the same congressional number, but that bill had all the money but just none of the change. So it had all of the money, giving more money to cancer than it had ever had in its life, and yet it was basically just still in the NIH. And that bill passed, and the person who had been charged with sort of leading this fight, Benno Schmidt, who was the sort of first venture capitalist, and he just knew in his heart that this was the wrong bill. Yeah.
Is Julie Fleischman here? I don't know if she's moved on. Julie was at our lunch today, and she's the head, some of you would know this better, but of essentially the National Pancreatic Cancer Association, right. Or something fairly close to that. And we had an interesting conversation after the lunch where she made the point that while the survival rate from pancreatic cancer is about 6%, it's very small. And she said 10 years ago, virtually no one was studying this, that it was just sort of a dead end. Now there is a field, there are people that are devoting themselves, there are some potential prospects moving on. As I mentioned at lunch, I raised the question about essentially, I don't really call them silos, but part of the cancer community being compelled to organize, to find celebrities, to get postage stamps to support their cause, to do these things to sort of raise the profile of their particular piece of the cancer puzzle. And I've always been uncomfortable with that approach to things that are obviously such an important, common, and public good. And I wonder, to some degree, what is lost in that approach. I remember, and I admitted it today, and I feel kind of awkward about it, that in the 1990s when Dianne Feinstein approached my boss, Senator Bingaman, about signing up to support a breast cancer postage stamp so that you would pay a little bit more for the postage stamp and the benefit, the surplus of that would go to this. And I told Jeff at the time, I said, what a crappy way to fund such an important arena. And you, in a way, kind of minimize and trivialize it. And what about all the other cancers out there? Do you create something sort of a rush like this? And I'd be interested to get you're into this far more than any others that I know. You've looked at a lot of the different kind of competing, but stand aside cancer elements. Is there a better way? Are we missing something in terms of the way clinical trials are done? Are we missing something in the broad structure, the public good in each of these, by the way we force, whether it's various lymphomas or something, skin cancers, they have to go out and essentially find their own method of fundraising on the outside?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think that we tend to think of silos in the academic community and the research community. We don't think of it as much in the advocacy community. And as an advocate, and as someone who did serve, working with a charity, you see this quite a bit. It's not only a division of where your primary cancer is, you're a breast cancer person or somebody else is a multiple myeloma or colon cancer, but even within those spaces, the charities often compete with each other. So in breast cancer, there's a well-known sort of division between various advocacy groups and how they see the fight how it should be fought. And they do compete fiercely for funding, for donors, so that they can fund.
Is there a better way?
Well, I mean, this is the challenge, is that people have the right to go and support the causes that they believe in, and I think it does get out a lot of, get the message out there, that more is needed, and the more attention is needed. And so, trying to bring in these various constituencies into a sort of a more, gestalt way would be terrific. And there have been efforts to this. There was the sort of Million Cancer March, where a number of years ago, where a lot of different cancer organizations got together and worked on this. But I think one of the things that you're hitting on is what we not seen with the AIDS community, which was much smaller and more homogenous in a sense of the message and more fierce. Mm-hmm. Cancer is so big and so giant. 1.7 million Americans are newly diagnosed a year, and yet it's almost so apparent that it's too obvious. So we don't think of it as an urgent need. So
for the audience's sake, we had this discussion about how those afflicted with HIV/AIDS and frustrated with the clinical trials process essentially stormed the barricade and compelled a very different set of behaviors and treatments and approaches on this.
Laurie Garrett, author of Betrayal of Trust and many other books and a brilliant journalist, she had brought up this issue that there was something unique about the AIDS the community in terms of demanding change from the way the regulatory process is and the way drug developers work together and had created new mechanisms for getting drugs out faster. And I remember, and I told Laurie afterwards, when I went down to the FDA, and you go to this building in Rockville, and nobody goes to Rockville. I mean, that actually sounds like an indie rock song, doesn't it? Nobody goes to Rockville. And I asked, I was meeting with the FDA director and the assistant director and the deputy director and the deputy director, and then before I got there, I asked the doorman, the security guy, I said, when was the last time anybody showed up here to picket? He said, the AIDS crisis. Because there's this sense that as overwhelming as this is, it's not a crisis. Now, the Institute of Medicine just had a fantastic report just a couple of weeks ago. And what they said is, we're in a crisis. We're in a crisis of cancer care. This isn't some radical muckraker journalist saying this. This is the Institute of Medicine. And one of the things they talked about was the demographic time bomb of aging America, getting into the sort of hot zone, if you will, of cancer incidence. Needing cancer care and not having the resources to take care of people. So I believe we are in a crisis, and we have to address that.
The other thing we talked about this morning, and that you touch on in your book, is that this notion of the system needing to take risks, the system needing to, and Mukherjee was talking about risky predictions that help drive it out. And again, in our earlier discussion today, I think many people in the room thought that the industry itself, that doctors, research, tends to be fairly risk averse.
Yeah.
Why is, I don't get that. Like,
Right.
Why is that? Aren't there like billions to be made by somebody that, finds the cure to cancer? And so what is wrong in the marketplace of how this operates? Because that's where you want, in looking at your book today, that's where you want things to go as well. So it's not reckless, it's sort of smart risk. But why do you think the system is inhibiting those sorts of jumps? And how would you structurally change it so that it's responsible risk-taking?
Well, to take the first issue first, there is a mindset. And the mindset is that the sins of commission are worse than sins of omission. In fact, we don't even think of sins of omission. We don't think about the cost of inaction. We only think about the cost of action. And so this is really true in drug development and drug testing, is, heaven forbid somebody comes out with a drug and it has this, horrible side effect, and, people die, and this is part of the reality. And we've seen this with drug withdrawals at a somewhat frantic pace over the last number of years. Drugs we thought were safe, where there's a black box warning or some sort of horrible side effect that's noticed and then withdrawn from the system. I think that part of what we fail to understand is that in the delay, in the bureaucracy, and the inertia, which we think of as benign functions, there is a cost. And the cost is lives are lost. When drug trials, when it takes 16 years to go through certain drug trials, and you have, years to just accrue the patients to a trial, there's time lost and opportunity cost in all of that. And so I think that how you would change that would be first to change the barriers to entry. So, it's very expensive to do drug trials. And part of that is because what we expect a certain level of certainty out of those trials. And we don't get the certainty. We don't get the certainty. You have to find out whether it's safe and effective. And after 16 years, say, of studying Avastin, with 1,000+ trials initiated and 400 completed, we still don't know why Avastin works, which is a drug that combats, it's supposed to turn off angiogenesis, a process that recruits blood vessels to tumors. We still don't know why it works or doesn't work in any single patient in any single disease. And so we also don't know whether there are subsets of patients that respond better perhaps with certain molecular subtypes. We don't know if it would work better in certain stages of disease and earlier patients. We don't know anything from the process. So part of our challenge is to rebuild the clinical trials process so that we can learn from it. That's what I talk about a lot in the book. And it's easy to sort of give the bumper sticker statement here, but the broader argument, I think, is worth having.
You've also written that while many have seen or argued that cancer death rates are declining, you've interestingly argued that that's deceptive.
Right.
And are they not declining?
I do sound dour.
Yeah.
Can I change this? Can I just be the guy that
I'm going to ask you some fun stuff in a minute. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
Are fewer people dying more quickly or not?
Well, not fewer people.
Yeah.
Fewer people are not dying, so we have more people dying. The question is how you judge those people, so how you break them down. So one way, so when epidemiologists talk about something called burden, which is basically how many people are getting the disease and dying of it, they really look at crude rates, which is the percentage of the patients per population, so 100,000 in the population. And so it's just very simple. It's sort of like, calories per serving, or it's very simple math. And so that number has gone up 14% since we started the war on cancer in 1970. Now, it's come down a little bit since 1990, so we're making some progress in recent years, but it's up, right? But that's not how epidemiologists look at it. They look at something called age-adjusted death rates. And the point of that is to compare different regions in the same time frame. So if you wanted to look at, say, Florida and Texas, right? Well, Florida has, Texas has 6 million more people and 5,000 fewer deaths or something like that each year. And the reason is it's got one of the younger populations in the country, and Florida has one of the larger populations. So what they do is they make those look like they have the same age distribution. It's called a standard age distribution. And what they do, they put everything towards the year 2000 standard, and then they say, okay, well, look, Florida's rates are actually lower. And that's really useful because by aging is a huge factor in cancer. And so when you filter it that way, you're able to find things you never would have seen before. For example, African Americans have much higher death rates from cancer than white Americans at the same age. You'd find that, you might be able to find subgroups where there might be cancer clusters, or, find cancer populations that have lower rates overall per age. But it doesn't give you a good sense of the burden because it filters out age, and we're an aging society. So, I don't think it really gives us a good perspective on the demographic time bomb, as I said before, that's coming our way. It filters out a lot of that.
You're such a nice guy. I feel like you would. I keep thinking you'd be really fun to hang out with at a party, but I'm just wondering, what would you talk about?
Terrible.
And it's just, you're pretty intense.
It's an opportunity cost.
So before I jump in, can you give us the 3 top headlines of the 3 structural changes so we can finish up on an upward note on the how to win the war on cancer?
Well,
and which chapter is that? Because I had a hard time finding that.
Well, so here's the challenges is that you can't write a book without putting the how to win it in, but I didn't really have a how to win it. So, I was really up a creek without a paddle. So,
misleading title.
Yeah, it's totally misleading title. So basically my answer to that, and I talk about totally cowardly, to write a whole book on what we're doing wrong and not offer solutions. I own up to it. But the challenge, the way I look at it is, if you're banging your head against the wall and the old joke, it's doctor, it hurts when I do this. Well, and the doctor says, well, stop doing this. That's really the answer, is we've got to stop doing the things that are just dumb and that we all know are dumb. And that's the how to win it, And so, we can change the grant structure to stop doing things that are really dumb, Like forcing these, discrete R01 applications that have to be hypothesis-driven in this experimental system and that, and then you get your peer review, study section. And listen, they all aren't going to fund anything they don't know the answer to anyway. So, but you'd spend all this time gathering preliminary data, and it's like everybody's bummed out, and they're spending 10 years as a postdoc purgatory, and they hate it, and they want to quit. It's like dumb, stop doing it. So, that's really the challenge. That's how to win it. Stop doing that.
Please give a warm round of applause to Clifton Leaf, The Truth in Small Doses.